Um, let's turn to our study today. Again, very happy to see you all with us. We'll begin as we do with a bracha. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We are grateful to have been given access to holiness through our engagement in the study of Torah. And of course, it is Torah lishma, Torah for its own sake, Torah that is not for an ulterior motive. I see at the bottom of my screen that our live transcript is on, at least for me. For those of you who might benefit from closed captioning, it is available at the bottom of your screen, and that might be of use to you. I suppose for future, for those who will watch this in the future, it's probably worth having the closed captioning on. I'll try not to let it distract me. So today, I'm bringing a text again from the Yismach Yisrael. Yisrael Yerachmiel of Alexander. A late 19th century Rabbi. Alexander derives from around Warsaw, students of the Kotzker Rebbe. Because it is a late 19th century teaching, there are aspects of it which are not particularly innovative. I think compared to the burst of creativity at the early 19th century of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich and their students, where the explosion of the movement of Chassidut into Eastern European communities, where really Hasidism became the predominant cultural flavor in most places in Eastern Europe. Even if people weren't themselves Hasidim in the sense of disciples or devotees of a particular Rebbe, they were influenced by the cultural milieu of Hasidism. As the 19th century moved on and the Enlightenment and emancipation, both political and intellectual, moved eastward, Hasidism became even more conservative than it was in its origins. Because as Art Green has taught me, and as I would say is true, that Hasidism was a revival movement, not so much a reformation. It was intended to inspire people to inflame their hearts, to deepen their passionate devotion to traditional practice. And it was traditional practice that was the vehicle for this spiritual growth. By the late 19th century, the conservatism of the movement was reinforced by its rejection of and resistance to the Enlightenment and Reformation and the introduction of progressive Judaism, as we would call it. And ultimately, in the late 19th century, the Gerer Rebbe, also derived from a student colleague of the Kotzker Rebbe, was instrumental in creating the Agudat Yisrael, the collective, the organization of ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities, whether they were Hasidic or Litvish, Yeshivish, they all aligned against Zionism and against the progressive movements and liberalism. So there's a way in which the text I'm going to present today is of that sort, because the primary teaching is the importance of a simple faith, of faith in God and faith in the commandments as God's will for us. And I want to acknowledge that that may not be where most of us sit. And the mitzvot are likely to be practices that we've taken into our lives in ways that are idiosyncratic, either according to our family tradition or the synagogue where we landed early in our life, late in our life, what it is that we can afford to do in terms of time or social circles or our personal finances. All of that affects how we individually choose which mitzvot we're going to keep. But I suspect that all of us have some sense that there are practices in which we engage that we do because we understand them to be part of the system of mitzvot, that they are what Jews do because that's what Jews do. And in some way, I'd like us to hold on to that as our own personal way of considering that indeed there are mitzvot that we do as a matter of faith. Faith in the power of tradition, faith in our own place as a link in the chain of tradition, our own sense of what connects us to the Jewish people, and also what might connect us to God. I want to recall the last teaching that I brought, which was, again, about not fearing what is happening around us, but remembering to turn towards whatever is there and do what comes next. And I had in mind when I taught that, even though when I taught it, I applied it to economics, I did have in mind also climate issues, because I think that that's a dimension where very often we see something that is so big and so hard to get our heads around and feels so overwhelming and terrifying that we just turn away from it and don't pay attention. And I'd like to connect the teaching from before Pesach, from Tzav, with this week, with the teaching that I have now from the Yismach Yisrael, that this issue of wanting to understand the reasons for wanting to have a rationale for doing the mitzvot, or a rationale for doing whatever it is that we're doing in our lives, Jewishly and otherwise, that sometimes that becomes an impediment and possibly even an excuse not to do. There are all sorts of conflicting information that comes to us and might be dispiriting. So many of us for the past 40 years, could even be 50 years, have been seeking to recycle. And we trust that if we put plastic in the recycling bin, that it's going to be recycled. And in many instances, that's no longer the case. Countries in the third world, beginning with China, but also elsewhere, are no longer accepting our plastic recycling. Some of it's just going to landfill because it's got labels on it, or it was misdirected into plastic rather than something else. And we might say, if it's not being recycled, why am I doing this? But having a habit of paying attention to what it is that we use in the world, rather than being dispiriting, can now become the inspiration to continue to pay attention to the things that we need to do in order to create and maintain a livable world. And it's there that faith, as the Yismach Yisrael offers us, is something for us to consider. So let me, here we are. Here's our text for today. Come on. Here we go. I don't know why this is not showing up. Let me stop and start again. I'm sorry. There we go. So in this moment of Parshat Shmini, we have this antecedent to this were the 7 days in which Aaron and his sons were inducted into the priesthood. These 7 days were understood to be days in which Moses erected the Mishkan and took it down, and in which he performed the sacrifices attendant to the induction of Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. So Moses was serving as priest. He was also serving as the contractor who would erect the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and also the leader of the people. And after 7 days, we now come to the moment of Aaron stepping into the role that he would. The conclusion of the 7-day process was this 8th day of dedication, and Aaron was being now fully presented as the high priest. And Moses and Aaron, so all the people came and brought their sacrifices and stood before God. And Moses says, this is what God has commanded that you do, that the glory of God might appear to you, that the presence of God might appear to you. So what is that thing, right? Was it bringing the sacrifices? Was it standing before God? Was it obeying Moses' command? It's not at all clear, actually, from the verse what it was that Moses meant when he said, this is the thing that God commanded that you do in order for the glory of God, the kavod, to appear to you. And the Yismach Yisrael quotes the Orach Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar, who asks these various questions. What is the thing that Moses referred to by saying this is what? And further, what's the significance of saying that the people gathered before Adonai, before Yud He Vav He, rather than gathering before the tent of meeting, which is actually what the Torah says just before this, that they gathered before the tent of meeting. And finally, there is this midrash from an early rabbinic midrash, from the Sifra, from Torah Kohanim, from the early rabbinic midrash on the book of Leviticus, in which it suggests that when Moses says, this is what God commanded you do, the thing that Moses was telling them was, remove that Yetzer Hara from your hearts so that you will all share one intention, Etzah Achat, one point of reverence for God, one Yirah. And it could also be Yirah as one God. So we understand that the Yismach Yisrael wants now to make his points, that standing before God is a very high project. And that although the people appeared before God, that there must have been something amiss that Moses would have said, this is what God commanded, get rid of that Yetzer Hara. So the Lifnei Adonai is associated by the Yismach Yisrael with the experience of Yom Kippur, when the high priest came out from the Holy of Holies, having brought the incense there as part of the atonement and purgation ceremony of Yom Kippur. And he says, from this day, atonement will be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins. Lifnei Adonai titaru. You will be clean before Adonai. That is cleansed beyond mortal comprehension, that God is going to do something for us and through the ritual of Yom Kippur beyond anything that we can imagine. And that's the level of Lifnei Adonai that he thinks is going on. Because remember, as part of the Avodah ceremony, as part of the ritual that's reported by the rabbis, is the high priest on that day, when he said Lifnei Adonai, he didn't say Adonai. He pronounced Yud He Vav He, however that was pronounced. And when the name came out, it came out not because he said it. Hashem Yotzei Miforash. The name comes out explicitly from the mouth of the high priest. Not that it came out, but it comes out, it was forced out, he says, because it was so incomprehensible that anybody could perceive what it means to be before God. So here's where he comes up with the problem that the people had on that day of standing before God, that this generation of the wilderness is considered by the mystical tradition and even the Midrash as Dor De'ah, a generation of awareness, of comprehension. How? Why? Because they experienced great perceptions of divinity in Egypt. And then at the sea, right, they said, Ze Eli, this is my God, as if they were pointing, seeing God right there. And they received the Torah where they had a direct experience of God at the top of the mountain. And in this sense, the whole community drew near. They were brought close to the Blessed Holy One. They stood before God in wondrous attachment, and they considered that, according to their perceptions and preparation, they were worthy of Shekhinah resting on them. But this thought could only come to them from lack of faith, right? In saying, oh, we had all this, we've got this down, we've got the perception, right? And that it's because of them and their attainments that Shekhinah will rest on the Mishkan, on the tabernacle, and on them. And the Rabbi of Vorki, taught the essence of the sin of the golden calf arose due to lack of faith. And this generation, so aware of divinity in their midst, considered that they had prepared themselves so completely as to be ready to serve as a throne for Shekhinah, in the same manner that a prophet might prepare themselves for prophecy. But after missing their true leader for just a few moments, remember the golden calf, Moses, who taught them Torah and God's holiness, they nevertheless attributed their discomfort to Moses rather than themselves, saying, we don't know what happened to this man, Moses. They doubted their teacher until finally they fell into the sin of the golden calf. As the sages taught, anyone who casts aspersions on their teacher is like one who casts aspersions after Shekhinah. And this is even more the case regarding Moses, the teacher of all. So the people, in doubting Moses, fell into doubt. They allowed the Yetzer Hara to take root in their hearts, and they brought on themselves that God was removed from them. Shekhinah was not there. And so here, at the tent, when they thought that they had attained this degree of consciousness of before Adonai, Moses said to them, remove that Yetzer Hara from your hearts and do not continue to behave as you are with self-assessed greatness and understanding of God's wonders. Rather, only what Adonai has commanded that you do, even if you don't understand its purpose or reason. Do so only because we're obligated to fulfill the decree of the blessed Creator. And so I'm just going to go on because it is it's 5 pages of text and we're only on the 3rd. So this is how we should understand the blessing with which Moses and Aaron blessed the people. Scripture says Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of Adonai appeared to the people. Right? Rashi teaches that they said, may the pleasantness of Adonai be on us. V'yehi nom Adonai Eloheinu aleinu. God and God of our ancestors, they continued, may it be your will that Shekhinah rest on the work of your hands. Right? V'yehi nom Adonai Eloheinu aleinu. May the pleasantness of God rest on us. I think that what their blessing then says is, may it be the will of God, of our ancestors, that Shekhinah rest on the work of your hands, shetishre Shechinato al maaseh yadechem, because the sequel from the psalm is, so it goes, Vayhi nom Adonai Eloheinu aleinu, maaseh yadenu kononeh aleinu, right? May the work of our hands be established by us. Maaseh yadenu kononehu. May the work of our hands be established. So there's this sense of maaseh yadenu. So when they say, may it be the will, your will, God, that Shekhinah rest on the work of your hands, they're saying, V'hi nom Adonai Eloheinu aleinu. They're saying that that now, having conducted the inauguration of the Mishkan and the induction of Aaron and his sons into the priesthoods, may Shekhinah rest on the work of their hands, that is, on the tabernacle, for the sake of the people of Israel, that they remain in connection with God. But the Yismach Yisrael takes this another step. He says, what's that pleasantness? It's that which flows from the world to come. World to come, in the mind of the Zohar and the mystical tradition, is the Sphira, the Midah Bina, the upper supernal mother, the womb of all living things, the place from which everything flows. That's what the pleasantness is. And he goes on to quote the Zohar at length to say that it really is that our work is to raise Shekhinah, to rectify things so that God's will can be done. And that ultimately, he's concerned about quoting this line from the Zohar, that we should all be in a single bond with the patriarchs, arrayed with them fittingly in this action, right? That our actions should simply be for the sake of the mitzvot and connected to the avot. And he does this by reminding us that, ultimately we'll get to this piece, reminding us that there are certain things that we receive from our ancestors that we do because they gave it to them and they're good for us to do. The essence of fulfilling God's mitzvot should be simply because God commanded, and not through our investigation and contemplating the reasons for the mitzvot. The essence is simple faith, to have faith in God's exaltedness, which is infinite and incomprehensible, to know firmly that all our deeds, actions, and good thoughts are all from God and through God's power. As for all comes from you, and from your hand has it been given. Just to get the verse. Ki mimcha hakol umiadcha netanu lach. Right? From all comes from you, and from your hand it has been given. We have no claim on the Creator. Even if we were to purify and cleanse ourselves to be a worthy vessel for the presence of Shekhinah, we still need to realize who prepared us. We're not sufficient ourselves alone for this effort. Rather, you've made me rejoice in your deeds. Ki simachtani Adonai b'foalecha. Right? You, God, have even caused me the joy that I experience in what I perceive of your deeds, of your wonders in the world. Right? The joy is yours. This is what Moses intended when he said, "For surely Adonai will appear to you from God's initiative." Right? This is reflected as well in the passive voice, Vayera kavod Adonai aleichem. Right? Passive. It's the passive verb, Vayera. Know that all is God's glory. And due to God's great love, God will show you God's great light. And that's what he then goes back to the Midrash, that so you'll be of one intention, a tza'achat. An intention here is emunah. He quotes the piyut atzato emunah. It's I've forgotten the piyut. So anyway, he's making this long sequence in order to get us to the point of understanding that Eitzah Achat, one intention, that is one emunah, that emunah is one. Habakkuk came and reduced the fundamental principles to one. Tzaddik be'emunato yichyeh, the righteous live by their faith. So when we conduct inquiries into how God works, it's impossible for us to remain unified internally. There are certainly spiritually deep people who know God in a direct, personal manner, fulfilling the instruction, V'yadata hayom v'ashivota olavecha, know this day and keep in mind that Adonai alone is God, in heaven above and earth below, there is no other, each according to their particular capacities. But in matters of faith, all are equal. And each of us must have a simple faith in the oneness and unity of the blessed Creator. After all, who of us is greater than the Baal Shem Tov, who said before he died, I let go of all my spiritual attainments and hold fast to simple faith, the faith of a child. And then he unpacks the faith of a child and why it's called the faith of a child. And ultimately, it is that we have faith that what God offers us is for our good. So that's, I invite you, I offer you, I suggest to you that you undertake your own study of the text. It is long, it is complicated, and it may actually not be appealing to you in terms of this appeal that he makes to simple faith, because God says so. That is, I would say, fundamentally, what confuses and I think discourages most people from taking the mitzvot into their lives, particularly those that are particularistic, right? And this is, I think, the legacy of 19th century Wissenschaft and the reform movement in Central Europe that migrated here to this country, and our own individualism that I want to know, right? I'll see it, I'll believe it when I see it. Show me is the way we Americans conduct ourselves. And because we don't know God in a personal, direct way, and don't understand how God would communicate mitzvot, and why the mitzvot are, and in their particularities and their particularism. Why should I do this and that, not that? Why should I have, not eat pork and not eat shellfish, but, slaughter in a particular way? Why should I keep Shabbat on Saturday and not Sunday? And why not Wednesday? And why, these festivals and not another? I don't get it. And why it was an appeal to, and so appealing in the end to maintain ethical laws. Oh, those are what God gave us, because ethics apply to everybody. And so those are the laws that we can understand that God gave us. Why the particularistic ones? But there is something for us to consider about what it is that we do Jewishly or at all in our lives. How much of it is based on faith, on trust? Right? And I've said this before. I suspect that the craze of tinkering with cars that grew up in the 50s and into the 60s and persists even in some corners today was a legacy of the Second World War, where in order to keep the machines running, trucks and Jeeps, people had to know how to fix them. And so they would tinker. And they learned how to tinker. The automobiles that we drive today, particularly as they become computers on wheels, are so much more complex that I venture to say none of us today really know how our automobiles work. We understand basically what an internal combustion engine is, but we really don't know how it works. And we take it on faith that if we turn the key or press the button, whatever it is that we do, that the car will start. And if we put it into reverse, it will drive backwards out of the garage. And then we can put it in drive and it'll go forward and, it'll do whatever we want it to do. We don't understand so much, we take it on faith. There are also certain ways in which we live with each other that we take on faith. That I trust, in fact, that when I deposit my money in the bank, I trust and have faith that it will be there when I need it, that it will be given the interest that was committed to me, and that people will behave in a responsible manner. But I don't know. Do I really know when I, pick up my phone and I, push a button and open an app and send money to somebody, and it's really there, and how it got there? There's a great deal of faith that we have in our world. There's also the way in which we create a society. And it's one of the great difficulties that we're having today of not having faith in each other, not having faith in our ability to at least create a community of shared assumptions, facts, givennesses about how we should organize ourselves. But we want to have that faith. We want to be able to have faith in others that they will maintain what is necessary to sustain a society. And that faith is born out of ourselves, right? We carry that faith in ourselves, but it is what we've received from our ancestors, our antecedents, those who created this country and the structures of our communities, those who created organizations that we benefit from. We've received it in faith. So how more to apply this in our lives? Again, to jump back 2 weeks, I'd like to suggest that that we try to conduct ourselves and sort of train our minds to be curious, to read broadly, to learn what we can about the natural world and about climate change, and read carefully what it is that those whom we trust say we should do personally, and then in terms of policy, writ large, and then do it. Now, part of this is not what the Yismach Yisrael suggests. He says, we're not doing chakirot and drishot. We're not, investigating and checking into why God would want us to do this and not that. Yes, I did say read broadly, study deeply. But at a certain point, you're going to trust either Al Gore or you're going to trust Bill Gates, right, who's written about the environment recently, or somebody else. And then because you're not them, you don't know all that they know, you're going to say, I trust them and I will organize my life accordingly. And then on that faith in them and in what they suggest, you will then continue to act and not allow fear or uncertainty to dissuade you, or allow fatigue or despair to dissuade you. The same is true in terms of social justice, in terms of just doing the work of listening deeply and having faith that what other people report of their lives is true. And on that basis, then, responding to what's being asked for. To say, I didn't know this, and now I do. And I have faith that if I respond as you ask, that we will all be better. I don't know personally, in many ways, what it feels like to constantly fear, to be uncertain in one's life. I have taken seriously and tried to internalize the power, or internalize my awareness, that is, of the power of the male gaze, how that shapes society, but also how it shapes interpersonal relations. And to understand that how men look at women affects their lives. And then, even though I haven't experienced it, I take it seriously to say, I will change my gaze. And understand that that then means that I also need to listen to what else women ask for in order to help them feel safe. I don't know what it means and feels like to be a person of color in white racialized America. and to constantly be sense at risk. But I have faith that those who report their life experience are reporting it honestly. And therefore, I want to respond in faithfulness and in faith to what's being asked. It's often hard. It's very often confusing. And because we're going through a confusing time, it may mean that our faith in responding is wobbly, or we fall back and say, but wait a minute, I don't get it. What are you asking of me? I can't do that. But part of what spiritual practice in these ways is asking of us is that we investigate our own hearts to sense what might it be that we could do that would support and sustain in life and vitality all with whom we live. And that's what is being asked for. We don't have to become a great tzaddik. We don't have to become the leader of a movement. We don't have to understand everything in order to do. We have to become faithful. Faithful to life, faithful to aliveness, faithful to the